Chapter 1. Planning the Tour. A successful tour starts with a good plan. You need to know where you're going to play, where you're going to stay. You need to figure out how to get there and how long you need between shows. And most importantly, you need open lines of communication with promoters and venue owners. This chapter will provide you with pointers and tips to help ease the planning process and possibly help you avoid some pitfalls. Accommodations. Tip number 1, lodging needs. One of the first things you'll want to do when planning your tour is figure out where you're going to stay. There are a lot of options out there, and I've tried pretty close to all of them. From flying into a gig to find my gear and a hotel room key waiting for me, to sleeping on some dude's lawn after a show with only 5 people in attendance. I've been there. The first question you need to ask is, how many people do I need to find beds for? In many cases, you will have from 3 to 5 people in the band. If you have a couple of support people touring with you, that means you'll need to plan accommodations for up to 8 or more people for a small independent tour. If it's just the band and there are 5 or less, you shouldn't have too much trouble making accommodations work on a budget. If you have support people with you, it could get trickier. Most hotel room prices are based on single or double occupancy, and they may charge extra if you have extra adults checking in. So just sharing a single room is not always an option if you stick with traditional hotels or motels. On the other hand, if you're touring with a van or a large vehicle and you are traveling to a few different cities, you could take turns between staying in a room and sleeping in the van. Tip number 2, get creative. Let's face it, if you're starting out in the music business and you don't have corporate sponsorship, you're going to have to be flexible in your tolerance of lodging options. In the summertime, putting up tents in a local host band's backyard can be a lot of fun. We'll talk about networking with local bands in a later chapter, but for now, keep in mind that making friends on the road can be invaluable to having a good tour. As I mentioned above, splitting the sleep in the van duties is an option, though you may be able to avoid it if you're creative. I haven't had to sleep in the van for a few years now. One of the best things to come our way in a long time is the couch surfing industry. More than a couple of times, we've used apps to book entire apartments for less than what a hotel room would cost. We've also taken to social media to ask fans in the area or friends in the area if they can help us out. In fact, the apartment I mentioned in the introduction was a guest apartment that was available for rent on a nightly basis in a friend's apartment complex. We had a whole 2-bedroom apartment to ourselves for about what a single occupancy room would have set us back. Don't forget your sense of adventure. However you do it, remember that the most important thing is making a great show happen. In my experience, some time on the road dealing with the challenges of less than perfect lodging can often make for some stellar performances. Booking. Tip number 3, agents and unions. If you or your band are relatively new to a scene, you might consider enlisting a local booking agent or joining the American Federation of Musicians, AFM, the National Musicians Union. For example, my band plays in the larger cities around the Pacific Northwest and Mountain West regions, so we have contacts in most of those cities. If we were planning a week-long tour of the region and wanted to add some midweek shows in smaller towns like The Dalles, Oregon, Longview, Washington, or Moscow, Idaho, we might consider using a booking agent in any of those places, since we don't have established fan bases there. Another option is to take to social media and see if there aren't some local bands in the area that you can put a show together with. We've done this a lot and made some great contacts that way. Dealing with promoters and club owners. There are as many horror stories out there about shady promoters and club owners as there are audience members. And while I've certainly experienced the raw end of some deals, most of the time, as long as you act with professionalism, they will too. Communicate your needs and expectations clearly, and request clarification from them if you are unsure as to what they expect from you. If you're unsure about a promoter or a club, talk to the other bands that have played there. One thing that I never advocate for is pay-to-play gigs. If you are providing entertainment and they are making money off of it, then you should be making money too. We'll cover revenue in a later chapter, but there's no reason a decent band shouldn't be able to get paid, or at least book gigs, without having to pay to do so. Tip number 4. Contracts. What to look for. Not every club owner or promoter will want to use a contract, but generally, I feel better if we have one. Remember, contracts are there to protect both parties, not just the club owner, agent, or promoter. A well-written contract can not only protect you if things go bad, they can help to prevent things from going bad in the first place. First things first. Read your contract. You absolutely, positively have to read your contract. Most of the time, in my experience, the contracts one signs for most gigs are not overly complicated. A good contract should plainly specify things like what time you're expected to load in and where, what attire you're expected to wear, how long they expect you to play, what kind of songs they expect you to play, break schedules, if any, ticket information and payment arrangements, and possibly a rider. Riders. A rider is an attachment to the contract that contains things the musician requires in order to make the show happen. There are some hilarious examples of these in rock and roll lore. Brown M&Ms, anyone? But they are actually a fairly common occurrence when playing festival shows or other larger organized events. The key to riders is to not be greedy. Ask for what you need, and even what you want, to a point, but don't be absurd. Sometimes a rider is as simple as making sure there's water on the stage and a green room to change in. Other times, it can be as complicated as making sure that specific dietary requirements are met, if food is part of the deal, or that certain specialty equipment is available for use during the show, lighting, special effects, etc. In most of my experience, our riders include water, a 6-pack or 2 of beer, some food, and a green room to use before and after our set. Scheduling the tour. Tip 5. Give yourself enough time. It's important to understand the distances and times between shows and to plan for delays, especially in the wintertime. Snow, mechanical issues, construction, and traffic accidents are all common occurrences while on the road, and it's best to be prepared for all of them. Google Maps and other GPS apps are great for estimating driving time under ideal conditions, but life isn't always ideal. Beyond the unfortunate incidents mentioned above, there are other considerations too. On one of our trips, we played a late show in Missoula, Montana, and pitched a tent in the yard of one of the members of the band with whom we booked the show. We didn't even get inside of our tents until close to or just after 5 a.m. Ordinarily, that wouldn't have been too big a deal. This time, though, we happened to have booked a radio interview in Boise, Idaho, early the next afternoon. We knew going in that we were going to have to leave for Boise very early in order to make our booking, but we didn't take into account how late we would probably be up the night before. None of us were happy during the 7.5-hour drive that morning, and we arrived at our hotel room in Boise with only a few minutes to freshen up before having to walk a few blocks to the radio station to give an interview that would, hopefully, make people want to come to our show that night. All any of us really wanted to do at that point was sleep, but we had to go promote the show. Make sure you give yourself enough time to get to your destination safely, with plenty of time for rest, and you won't make the same mistake we did. Schedule changes. Sometimes, for whatever reason, the schedule of a show or even a tour needs to change. If a show is extremely undersold, the club owner might decide it's not worth it to have the show. Or the headlining band could be a no-show. There are a lot of different reasons for a show to be canceled. If that happens, you'll want to be prepared to improvise. I've been on shows on the road in which other bands have been added at the last minute because their other show got canceled. They found the club through social media and reached out to the club owner to ask if they could join the show. Even if they didn't get any money for the show, they got the chance to win some fans in Salt Lake City or wherever, and maybe even sold some merch. Tip number 6. Types of shows. Beyond your normal club show, where there's usually a bar and a stage and a house PA system, and sometimes an all-ages area, there are several other types of shows that present unique benefits and drawbacks. From big shows like festivals and opening spots on national tours to small charity benefit shows. The challenges and opportunities with these types of shows abound. Charity benefits. The best part of doing charity benefit shows is that you do great work to help out people in need. I've done benefit shows for organizations ranging from the American Cancer Society to Toys for Tots. Seeing the money that gets raised go toward helping people who need it is an amazing reward in and of itself. In addition to that, you can make a name for yourself and form great connections, and they're an opportunity to get more experience playing in front of a crowd. If you're doing benefit shows on a tour, however, those stops will cost you extra money, so be prepared to consider those costs a donation. Because of that, it's usually not feasible to add extra stops to a tour for benefit shows. But if you're already in a city for a paying show, adding a charity benefit show earlier in the day can be a great experience. Competitions and talent shows. I'll be honest, I hate these kinds of shows. They are an open pit boiling with egos, fakery, backstabbing, and all the worst parts of humanity. Avoid them at all costs. If you do end up booking yourself into one of these god-awful nightmares, the only advice I can give you is to treat it just like any other show, except you may or may not get paid. In my experience, these contests have very little to do with talent or the quality of your music. Instead, they are often dependent on how many tickets you sell, or some other not quite shady provision of the contest rules. Use it as an opportunity to try and pick up a few new fans and to sell some merch, but you'd do best not to count on any winnings from these kinds of events. Festival shows. These shows can be some of the most fun you'll have while on tour. The key with festivals is to be patient and be flexible. Festivals are big, complex things with a lot of moving parts, and promoters and organizers have their hands full at all times. A well-organized festival will provide you with a liaison, parking and loading instructions, gear requirements. Often bands will share amps and drum kits, or backline, to make setup and teardown between bands easier, and other vital information. Make sure you follow the instructions you're given, and be prepared to hurry up and wait, as festival logistics often mean long periods of waiting, followed by short periods of frenzied activities. Festival shows offer a fantastic opportunity for you to promote yourself, sell merchandise, and network with other musicians and promoters. Whenever you book one of these shows, make sure you and your whole band bring your A game. Festivals will usually have a large built-in audience, but many of them have probably never heard you, so you really have to work to win them over. Opening spots. My favorite shows on tour are always the opening spots for national acts. Period. These shows have been some of the most exciting and best shows of my life. Most of the bands for whom I've opened are bands I listened to growing up in the 90s, so getting to meet and share a stage with them several times has been incredible. With these types of shows, you should be able to expect professionalism from the promoters and venue personnel, though I have had one such show opening up for a national act in a small city in which the venue's sound person was over an hour late and the promotion for the show was a disaster. No matter what, though, professionalism at these shows should be your goal. Make sure that you're where you need to be, when you need to be there. And, of course, be prepared to play a great set so that the crowd is warmed up for the headliners. Outdoor shows. Playing outdoors is a different beast. The sound can be really wonky, the weather is rarely cooperative. Often these shows are on improvised stages with questionable power setups, weird lighting phenomena, and, of course, critters. As far as sound goes, shows in large open areas are susceptible to wind. The wind likes to make weird noises in microphones and blow sound waves around to play tricks on audiences and performers alike. If it looks like it's going to rain, it probably will, so you should cover the stage as much as possible to protect your gear and yourselves. Check your grounding when it comes to power. Try not to overload any circuits. It's best to have a good supply of extension cords with you if you plan on doing outdoor shows on your tour. You will also want to clean your gear after an outdoor show, as dust can wreak havoc on electronics. Shows during the day, especially for guitar players that use pedal boards or other floor effects, can be challenging. The direct sunlight often obscures LCD displays and LED on-off indicators on pedal boards, and forget about reading your tuner in the direct sunlight. I've played entire shows in the direct sunlight where I couldn't figure out why my tone was off, only to find that a pedal had been on the entire set and I couldn't tell because I couldn't see the light. Shows at night can also pose problems for lighting. If colored stage lights are the only light sources at the outdoor venue, it will be really hard to see and connect with the audience. It may also make seeing your gear difficult, depending on the setup. A final note about outdoor shows. There will be bugs. Oh yes, there will be bugs. I've also had random pets, like dogs and cats, join me on stage during solos. Be prepared. Wineries and breweries. These shows are usually a lot of fun. They are typically smaller venues with intimate settings. There's a lot of fun opportunities to change up your playing to match such a venue. If you're normally a loud rock and roll band, for instance, you can play more subdued versions of your songs, for instance. My band has done this in the past. For example, we've swapped an electric rhythm guitar for an acoustic, and I myself will use a smaller pedal and amp setup. It's fun for me because I get to figure out slightly different parts to play for songs that might otherwise go stale. Tip number 7. Tour support. Managers. If you can only have one support person on your tour with you, bring a manager. As a performer, your time on the road will be so much better if there's someone else there to communicate and coordinate with club owners and promoters, sound technicians, stage managers, and the like. It is an extra bed to think about, and a cut of the revenue if you take a good one, but if you can afford it, take a manager with you. Roadies. If there's a friend or two, or even significant others who want to tag along in exchange for helping load gear and run the merch booth while you do artist things, let them. It is usually not feasible to be able to pay people other than a manager to do this type of thing, though. Guitar technicians. Similar to roadies, if you have a friend who wants to come with you and you trust that person to set up your gear for you and tune your guitars between songs, by all means, do it. I have had the luxury of such a friend on 2 separate tours, and it was amazing. Of course, the needs of the band come first, so a manager is still your best bet if you can only bring one extra person along. Tip number 8. Do's and don'ts. Do's. Get creative and be adventurous when planning accommodations. Read your contracts. Give yourself enough time between shows. Book festival shows, opening spots, and winery or brewery shows as often as possible. Take a tour manager if possible. Don'ts. Don't be late. Don't book contests or talent show competitions if you can help it. Don't forget your sense of adventure, and don't forget to be flexible.